A quick summary of this segment might be useful at this point in time. We looked at the issue of Moshe's speech impediment and questioned the need for him to have raised it a second time in Perek 6, in light of the fact that it had been previously raised in Perek 4, and for which Moshe had received and accepted God's response that Aharon would be his spokesperson. The major Mefarshim attempt to justify raising the issue a second time by distinguishing between Perek 4 and Perek 6. Perek 4 dealt with Moshe's communication with the Bnei Israel, whereas Perek 6, Moshe is being asked to communicate God's wishes to Paro. The Rebbe in the Sikha rejects this option in view of the fact that it is in conflict with the Pshuto Shel Mikra understanding of the text, opting instead to build the distinction between Perek 4 and Perek 6 based upon Rashi's understanding and definition of the speech impediment. This distinction looks at the change of terminology that Moshe uses in Perek 4, Kvad Per Kvad Lashon, which suggests an ability to speak but with difficulty. In contrast, Perek 6, Moshe states that he is an Aral Svatayim. Rashi's definition of this is that his lips are blocked, and that for all intents and purposes, Moshe could not speak at all. The change of terminology would indicate that there had been a deterioration in Moshe's speech impediment, and for this reason, in Perek 6, when he was asked to communicate God's wishes to Paro, Moshe once again raises the issue of the speech impediment. Despite this deterioration, God's response once again is Aaron achicha yiyeh Neviyecha, that Aharon once again will remain as your spokesperson in any communications with Paro. And this brings us to the pasuk under discussion, in which God informs Moshe that Ata Tadaber, all that I shall command you, you are to communicate, and Aaron your brother shall speak with Paro. There are, though, two problems that need to be addressed. The first is superfluous information, in that pasuk 2 seems to be a repeat of pasuk 1, with respect to Aharon retaining his role as a mouthpiece on behalf of Moshe. Rashi appears to forewarn this superfluous issue by changing the transmission protocol and having Moshe and Aaron communicate God's instructions to Paro. This brings us to a second question, one in which Rashi's interpretation to Aral Svatayim would appear to be at face value invalid. If, according to Rashi, Moshe could not speak, then how is it that in pasuk 2 God tells him to Ata Tadaber? Even to Tadaber Pamachat would have been an impossibility. And here we have a response to diuk number 2, the use of the term kol shlichot or shlichut, in which God is giving Moshe a netinat koach, the Aral Svatayim situation notwithstanding, the ability to communicate information to Paro. In doing so, each and every time that Moshe spoke, it was clear that he was a shaliach of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. As such, Moshe did not have the liberty to phrase the wording as he saw fit, but had to relate the information kafi sheshamata mipi, exactly as he had received it from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and by the same token, just as God communicated the information just once, so too, as the shaliach of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Moshe could convey the information pam achat. This left us with the final diuk regarding the role of Aharon, the answer of which becomes quite obvious in light of the fact that Moshe functioned as a shaliach. His communication Palmachad was done by Lashon HaKodesh. We made two assumptions. God spoke in Lashon HaKodesh. 2, Pharaoh did not understand Lashon HaKodesh, and therefore there was a need for Aharon to Yom Litzenu, to physically translate the Lashon HaKodesh of God's instructions to a Lashon Mitzri that Pharaoh would understand. We then digressed to demonstrate the veracity of the two assumptions. Firstly, the fact that God spoke with Lashon HaKodesh is based upon Rashi's commentary to the naming of Chava as an Isha. The fact that Pharaoh did not understand Lashon HaKodesh came to us from the situation at the other end of Chumash Bereshit, in connection with Paro agreeing to allow Yosef to leave Eretz Mitzrayim in order to fulfill a solemn vow made to Yaakov that he would be buried in Eretz Israel. With this, we conclude part 3 of the Sikha.